I'm your host, Mika, and you are listening to Practical Alignment. Hello, everyone. My name is Mika, and I am an energy work practitioner and Qigong instructor. I have this podcast and my YouTube channel, Practical Alignment, to share tools for personal alignment and authenticity. In today's episode, I'm going to share with you my experience as someone who grew up in a relatively strict Catholic family and how that's affected my relationship to God, my relationship to prayer, and my relationship to religion. Growing up Catholic was a very interesting experience for me. Like most people, religion wasn't something that I got to choose, it was more something that was imposed upon me. It was very much embedded in my family and embedded in my culture, and so I really couldn't have expected anything different for me. However, like most people, again, I'm not very enticed by the things that are forced upon me. My experience with religion was that it was mandatory. I went to church every Sunday and I also attended classes once a week called catechism, which is pretty much like Bible study but for Catholics. To be honest, I don't really remember anything from catechism except for the moments when I would argue with my teachers about how much I disagreed with a lot of Catholic teachings. I found them to be way too rigid in many ways and really, really harsh. By the way, I just want to clarify that everything I'm sharing is my own interpretation of my experiences. I'm not condemning religions or anything like that. I'm just sharing my own journey. So do with that what you will and only take on what resonates with you. So yeah, catechism was basically like going to school on a Sunday, so I didn't really love it. And then when I was a child, church itself was more often than not just something that was really drab and repetitive for me. Sometimes it would freak me out because there were a couple Bible verses that were really intense and kind of scary. I distinctly remember one chapter that we would read that had to do with wailing and grinding of teeth, and that stayed with me and my psyche into my 20s, so you know how that made me feel. That being said, there were still parts of Catholicism that I did enjoy as a child. For example, I did enjoy praying before bed and talking to God. I enjoyed some of the hymns that we would sing at church, and I found them really pretty and touching. And I also really loved communion because in communion we would consume a bread wafer, which in Catholicism represents the body of Christ. So I would love eating that as a little treat, and I also liked that I could drink wine. By high school, I was living in a conservative small town that has a very high religious rate. And this town is Roswell, New Mexico, which has a very large Christian population. When I was in middle school and high school, at least, it was very embedded in the culture to invite people to your church. Like when I was in middle school, when I first moved, I remember on like my first week there, like everyone would tell me, "Oh, you should come to my church." And I was like, "Oh, that's weird. Like I already have a church." But they were like, "No, you should come to mine." I had a lot more friends when I was in Roswell that went to my actual church too. So, in many ways, church became more of like a fun social activity, like an after school hangout with some of my friends. But none of my closest friends went to my church, so I still never fully felt comfortable, but it was a little bit better than when I was a kid. I don't know if this sounds weird, but like collectively in my town, at least from like middle school to early high school, it was cool to be religious. Like people would proclaim themselves as a Jesus freak and it would be like a status thing. It was pretty common across the board. And the reason that I mentioned this is I honestly haven't seen anything like it since that time period and that like town itself. So it just might be because it was a small community. I would say that high school was the peak of my religiousness, but that being said, I was still, for the most part, very bored at church. I didn't like the process of it, and I was still arguing with my Catholic school teachers about what we were learning and me just not feeling like it was fair for some of the beliefs in the Catholic faith. For example, for me personally, I have a few people in my life who are queer who felt discriminated or feel discriminated by the Catholic Church, and that never sat right with me. I really struggled being a part of a community that made some people feel very isolated or sinful or wrong. There was just never a point in time where I was fully on board with the teachings of the Catholic faith, and there were too many gaps or questions that I had in my own beliefs that I couldn't really align with the church. So I never really felt like I was ever fully devoted. Bear in mind, up until this point, my only relationship with God was the one that was molded by the Catholic Church. So I didn't really have an understanding of what God was except what I was taught. I would sometimes feel conflicted though, because when I would pray privately, I felt like I had a different connection to God than the God that I was told about when I was in church. I was kind of scared of that God. With all that being said, my time as a Catholic was at its strongest when I was in high school, because during that time I was going through a process called confirmation. In Catholicism, confirmation is one of the three sacraments of initiation into the Catholic Church, the other two being baptism and Holy Communion, which you might be more familiar with. Confirmation wasn't really something that I was actively choosing for myself, but it was more so part of the natural progression of my catechism classes. It was leading to that point of me being initiated fully into the Catholic Church. And so with confirmation, it required a lot more curriculum. And with that curriculum, I was devoting a lot more time to Catholicism and to the church. For example, our attendance was being monitored at Mass, and you had to sign in when you went to church. And they would pay attention to how often you would go to church. And if you missed a certain amount of Masses, you wouldn't be able to be confirmed. So it was just getting a little stricter at that point. And another part of our curriculum was that we had to attend a retreat. This retreat was like an after hours course, I guess, where they had some friars come in and teach us more about Catholicism. Yeah. I will say, though, that at this retreat, we were engaging in a ceremony, and I honestly don't even remember what the ceremony was, but I do remember that during this ceremony, for the first time at this level of intensity, I felt a profound sense of incredible, incredible love. And at that point, I had burst into tears because I realized that I was feeling the love of God. Not the God that I was taught to fear, but a God that was so loving and compassionate. A God that wasn't exclusive with love. One that didn't have to teach me through fear, but instead through this tangible sense of just nurturing. That love was very tangible, and I'm really grateful that I have this sensation memorized in my body because it was very meaningful to me. So after this retreat, I was pretty much on the spiritual high until, as things naturally do, I returned to a sense of stasis. It still made me happy to think about, but I kind of came down from that pious, holy cow, sing it from the mountains feelings. By the time I graduated high school, my confirmation was completed, and when I was in college, I had a lot more autonomy. Again, like most people, college was a time for me for self exploration. And I tried going to church a few times, but I was feeling pretty bored with it, still not really connecting once again, so I slowly stopped going to Mass on my own. During this time, I also started experimenting with plant medicine. And during one of my experiences, I received this perspective of life that was very different from what I was used to. On my first plant medicine trip, I became hyperfixated on the idea of dinosaurs, and I just kind of like had this whole revelation about life on planet Earth, and I was thinking a lot about the dinosaurs and how they actually lived on the same planet that we were on and how much it's changed and how they're all gone. And the feeling that I got walking away from that experience was that nothing mattered and that everything was meaningless. It was kind of a strange and intense feeling to walk away with, that everything could be taken away in a matter of seconds. It was very existential of me, and I feel like it's just like a natural progression of life. Like we all hit that existential phase. Anywho, I took a pretty hard left turn and I was starting to feel like there was no point to anything, which in a way was quite freeing, but also very empty. During this period, I considered myself atheist, and at that time, things honestly felt pretty bleak. I felt extremely disconnected, and the sensation that I would describe for this experience and time period was gray. Everything was just kind of gray. I stopped praying, I stopped talking to God, I felt alone. It was all bleak. Now that I have some hindsight, I believe that I may have been rebelling during that time period, rebelling against the God that I knew under the rigidity of the Catholic Church, the God that I was taught to be wrathful, the God that was angry and punishing. I didn't want to subscribe to that God. So I knew that I didn't necessarily want to claim myself as Catholic, but on the other end of that spectrum, I also kind of intuitively realized that I was not happy being atheist either. There was the sense, like I said, of emptiness, of loneliness, of sadness, and even depression that I didn't want to subscribe to either. As much as I thought I wanted to, as much as I thought it was even cool to go from Catholic to believing in nothing, it didn't feel good either. What's really interesting is that presence that I felt during my retreat in the Catholic Church was almost like an anchoring point for me to remember that I wasn't alone and that there was something out there for me. It made me remember or kind of realize that in that period of time, I wasn't alone. So if that exists, then how can I believe that there's nothing for me? So slowly and naturally and in my own time, I began forming my own personal relationship with God through my own authentic beliefs. And finally, I was able to experience both freedom and wholeness. This relationship has only deepened and strengthened through my exploration of spirituality without religion. I believe that God is a light within all of us, and I feel God everywhere. In the sun, in the joy, and even in the pain, I feel God's presence. My connection to God has deepened the more that I've opened up to myself. And I think that that's such an incredible blessing, that the more I get to know me, the more I get to experience God. I do also want to note that I've been quite reluctant to share my thoughts on this topic for a few reasons. It's taken me a few years to work up to this, where I feel comfortable in sharing myself so confidently. On one hand, when I stopped practicing Catholicism and started leaning into my own spirituality, I felt like a black sheep in my family, and I was afraid that I would be rejected or that there would be repercussions for me no longer identifying as a practicing Catholic. It was a big concern of mine at the beginning of this journey, but over time I've come to realize that all is well and that I am secure and that my family loves me no matter what. At least I haven't experienced anything really negative where I feel otherwise. I do realize how lucky I am for being able to say that, so I have a lot of gratitude for that being the case. Now, on the other side of this coin, on why I haven't shared this part of myself yet so freely, is that I've been a little afraid of sounding too preachy or religious if I do talk about God or praying or blessings or miracles. Based on my own experience, I know what it's like to not be receptive to these things if you don't believe in them. I've seen people physically recoil at the mention of these things, and I do think that this has a lot to do with religious trauma or people just having very unsavory experiences from religion or religious people. I get it because I can feel my own judgment towards religion itself in the way that I've shared this podcast. I clearly have a bias towards how I feel about it. I'm still resistant towards it in some ways, which is something for me to unpack myself. I can't even say that I'm resistant towards all religion, I guess, either, because I haven't been able to experience all religions. I know a lot about Catholicism and then a little bit about a few other religions. Because of this, in the past, you've probably heard me soften my terminology. I would use only words like the universe or source, and I'd say things like converse with the universe instead of pray to God. And for me, these terms are pretty interchangeable. I mean, personally, I like to consider myself as praying. Like, I pray and I pray to God. And it feels more authentic for me to describe it in that way. That description of what I'm doing, those word choices feel more like what I'm doing. It feels authentic. It feels more honest to me than just saying that I'm talking to the universe. However, like I said, they're interchangeable at the same time. Like I do be talking to the universe too. The point that I'm trying to make is that I in the past have been very selective about the ways that I'm describing this communication with this power that's beyond ourselves, but within all of us. I I've been avoiding using God and I've been avoiding using praying because I understand that people can be resistant towards these terms. And I wanted to make my work more accessible and palatable for more people. Because of my resistance towards religion and appearing religious, I am working on being more comfortable sharing, the term God and saying that I pray and that I ask for miracles and consider things as blessings. I'm working on being okay with other people perceiving me as religious, even though I'm not. Like, it's so interesting. I consider myself just like a spiritual person, but I have this incredible sense of apprehension towards religion, or at least my own experience of religion. There are so many religions out there that I have not explored, and I am not going to shut myself down to the possibility that there might be something out there for me that I can fully subscribe to. But right now, where I am, my experience of religion has not been my favorite. And so, like I said, I have a resistance around people thinking that I'm just like that. But the question for me to work on myself is, can I continue to do the things that I'm doing in the most authentic way possible for me and be okay with other people's perceptions of me, even if I don't agree with them? It's not my job to manage how other people perceive me and make sure that they don't think I'm religious. Like for me, this all just boils down to authenticity and me learning how to proudly embody the work that I do, regardless of how other people interpret it. That's the lesson. That's the juice. That's the gold, baby. So, I've gone to church a few times with my family since I've stopped practicing Catholicism, and every time has been very interesting. And I can definitely feel my walls start to come up during some of the prayers and incantations, which again, I'm working on developing more neutrality towards. But I will say that there are still parts of the Catholic Church that I hold dear to my heart. There are still parts of the Catholic faith that I find very comforting. And I think that's the point of it all is to, for me at least, to find different parts of spirituality that really resonate with me and to practice those because they make sense to me. So, one thing that I still enjoy doing is making the sign of the cross when I pray. I don't know if it's just embedded in me and I almost feel like it's it's like shielding. I almost envision it or liken it to qigong when we start sealing our energetic space. That's the kind of sensation that I am still filled with, which I find is very intriguing. So, I still do the sign of the cross when I begin my prayers. Something else that I enjoy, that I've enjoyed and mentioned before since childhood, is some of the hymns that they sing in church are so pretty. They bring tears to my eyes sometimes. They remind me of the God that I know and love. So, for example, there is a song called You Are Mine, and the lyrics to this song are: Do not be afraid, I am with you. I will call you each by name. Come and follow me, I will bring you home. I love you and you are mine. And it just makes me so happy to hear that because that's the sense of like that inclusivity. Everyone's allowed, everyone's invited. we're all here, we're all in it together. That's that's what I like to celebrate. There are a few prayers that I find very comforting, one that I've incorporated into my life very regularly. I first heard this in church as a hymn. The prayer and the song are essentially asking God to make us channels of God's love so that we can be in better service to the world and to the people around us. It's so beautiful. That's become one of my daily prayers, is to ask God to help me be a channel of peace and love on this earth, to help me be a clear vessel in order to be of highest service to the people around me, to be kind to myself and to be kind to others, and to embody the love that we're meant to share here on earth. I do think that it takes a certain amount of discipline to be able to be a clear channel. And so, another thing that I pray about is just asking God to help me align my thoughts, my words, and my actions to be on the path for me to best carry out my mission and purpose here on earth, and to have the clarity to know what that is as well. I've also shared a prayer for abundance on my previous episode, episode number 33, Ask for More. And in this episode, I share how I first came across this prayer when I was in my very strict Catholic grandmother's house. She had a book which was interpreting a story from the Bible where a man named Jabez asked God for more blessings in his life. Up until I found this prayer, which is called the Prayer of Jabez, I thought it would be rude to ask God for more things or for the things that we wanted in our life. And reading this book and hearing this prayer kind of helped me rewrite that narrative. So I highly recommend listening to that episode. Again, that's number 33. I especially like to recite this prayer when I'm in a really good high vibrational state, because it makes me at a higher frequency to attract more situations of a similar nature. So, whenever I'm enjoying myself deeply, I recite this prayer and ask for more situations to come to me, just like the feeling that I'm experiencing. I ask for more. The prayer of Jabez is a really fun one for me because it helps me blend, my belief systems. I don't have to completely shun and file away everything that I learned from Catholicism. There are pieces of Christianity and the Bible that I can, resonate with, and then again make it my own or interpret it in my own lens or use it in ways that feel authentic and fulfilling for me. And moving on to the last thing on our agenda today, I decided to do something a little out of my comfort zone, but in the spirit of everything that I've shared today, I thought, why not? So, I'd like to end this podcast episode with a prayer. And if this isn't your thing, you have been warned. You can pop off, and I'll see you later, my friend. But if you want to stick around for a prayer, uh, then stick around. Dear God, thank you so much for waking us up this morning. I want to thank you for this space for all of us to join together in community. Please help us live today in alignment with our highest good and the highest good of all those connected to us. Please help us remember who we are and fill us with the courage to carry out our missions here on earth. Please help us be disciples of love and grace and share that with humanity. Help us be kind, patient, and mindful with ourselves, and kind, patient, and mindful with others. Please open our hearts, bless us, and let us share our overflow. If we feel in despair, if we feel dark or heavy, please fill us with your love and compassion and remind us that we're never alone. Help us release what is not ours to carry from our space. Angels, guardian angels, spirit guides, and ancestors, thank you so much for all that you do. Please help align our thoughts, words, and actions to be on track with our deepest desires and dreams in alignment with our highest good. Please support us, guide us, and help us feel your loving presence. I ask that you please clear our energetic fields and help us fill back our spaces with authentic energy, using that as life force to fuel our paths. Help us be clear channels of peace on earth. Thank you and amen. Aho, aho, and so it is. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode. Something that I'll never take for granted is having the space and being able to express myself so freely. And you are such a big part of that for making this community. So thank you so much for joining. I hope this episode was helpful for you, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye.